Welcome everyone, Christine here with a discussion about some of the most useless campaigns in Total War Warhammer 3 Immortal Empires. Not necessarily the worst campaigns in the game, that is a completely different discussion I think. Though there are obviously going to be some similarities and legendary lords that are going to be on this list that would be on that list as well. But these campaigns might as well not exist within Warhammer 3. As in, if you literally removed these campaigns, not necessarily all the characters, but if you remove the campaigns, I don't think the game would suffer for it much at all. In fact, it might just benefit from it. So first off on this list, we have, of course, Tretch Craventail. I know Clan Rectus has some relevance in the lore, especially with Storm Vermin, but when we look at Total War Warhammer, and when we look at the Skaven, the melee-focused Skaven playstyle has always kind of been more of Queek's thing, right? That's how he was handled as a character. Sure, they're trying to make some changes, but ultimately Queek is still the Storm Vermin character, and he's a much better campaign than Tretch. I mean, there are certainly some inherent problems that do come up with Storm Vermin, specifically, like they're not really that great of a unit. And yes, Tretch does have a bunch of benefits of additional armor, base weapon damage per experience rank for Clan Rats and Storm Vermin, but just not really a great unit overall to focus a campaign on. And then you have the worst situation where you have two Legendary Lords. They're both kind of working in that same playstyle. Sure, Tretch does have more than that. He has ambush success chance, vanguard deployment below, enemy reinforcement. Do you know who has a menace below benefit as well? Queek. Queek may not have an ambush success chance benefit or encourage for Storm Vermin, but all the same, you kind of start seeing the point over there. Like, I think Tretch probably should have been a legendary hero to some extent or another, not necessarily a legendary lord. You look at his skill line, ooh, he gets a bunch of useful benefits for like devastating flank or melee attack during ambushes after retreating, Master of Guile, replenishing campaign movement range after winning a battle. Sure, these are pretty solid, all the same. It's still not really worth it to focus a campaign playstyle on Storm Vermin when you already have that. It's kind of like just, let's make a sharier version of Queek that we kind of try and make somewhat different, but never really works out. I mean, I understand that Tretch does represent, like, a lucky Skaven, and the backstabby nature of the Skaven probably the best out of all the Skaven characters we do have in the game, but he doesn't play like that. His campaign is not about screwing everyone over for his own benefit, including his allies. In general, Skaven do have that issue in Total War. Just a complete letdown of a campaign, a nothing campaign that doesn't really make that much sense to be there in the game overall. And number 4 is Epidemius of Nurgle. Looking at Nurgle, you have Tamarkan, who's focused on the military might of Nurgle and unique heroes. You have Festus for the Warriors of Chaos, who's focused on plague quantity, because Festus can make more plagues than the other Legendary Lords of Nurgle, maybe more than all the other Legendary Lords of Nurgle combined, due to the way that his infection mechanic works, because he gains infections through battle. He doesn't gain them through buildings, but he also doesn't need to spend infections to construct buildings. Then you have Kugath, who's focused on quality plagues. So where does that leave Epidemius? What does that leave Epidemius with? Well, pretty much nothing at all. He doesn't have the best plague, he doesn't have the most plagues, and he doesn't have the military might of Tamarkan to make up for it. Like, if we look at Epidemius's skill line, first and foremost, actually, what we see over here, we do get a population surplus point for newly captured settlements. Okay, that's useful, but you're not really gaining any substantial benefit in terms of being able to make plagues. Your plagues you might be able to use plagues more often, but you're going to be limited in how many plagues you're capable of making in a campaign as Epidemius. And that is a specific problem for Epidemius because his unique faction mechanic is built around the idea of making a lot of plagues to unlock these kind of benefits. But to give you some context, it would be a tall order even for Festus, and it is a tall order for Festus, who again only uses infections for plagues. It is a fairly tall order to maintain 20 plagues, or even 10 plagues in a campaign. For Epidemius, yeah, you can do it, but you're sacrificing an enormous amount for that, and the kind of benefits you're getting for it make it completely pointless to focus on this, as opposed to military capacity, research capability. So it's absolutely not worth it. Now, this is a problem with regards to how plagues are made, how plagues are spread, but you do end up having that specific issue. And then on top of that, Epidemius doesn't necessarily have any kind of amazing combat benefit. You look at Kugaf, he's actually pretty strong in battle. Epidemius is not. Now, I wouldn't say it's the hardest campaign. In fact, that's kind of the worst part about it. Like, you might think, oh, you have to fight Malice Darkblade. That's part of your victory conditions. Well, you kind of don't. Sure, it is part of your victory conditions to destroy Malice Darkblade, but you can avoid that for a decent amount of time. And in fact, you might just ignore Malice Darkblade for a good amount of time and let maybe Sigval deal with him, while you're doing other things in this campaign. And it's a relatively safe starting position, so it is pretty much a nothing campaign that has almost no point of existence. Making another plague-focused character for Nurgle, when we already had 2, is just, and not giving him any kind of special benefit with respect to plagues, except like, oh, just make a lot of plagues when he's not really even that well suited for that, is just a really questionable situation in general in Total War. So this character, I get it, he's a free character, but really Kugaf is worth playing far more than him. Like, if you want to play a character similar to Epidemius, but that one that is significantly better, play Kugaf. You'll have a better time. Or play Champions of Chaos and play Festus, or play Tamarkan. Seriously, Tamarkan has kind of the same situation in terms of how many plagues he can make as Epidemius, but he has so many other benefits in his campaign as well. Funnily enough, he gets better benefits from making plagues because he gets fealty with Kaisk in that campaign. So there's actually more incentive to make a lot of plagues, quickly at least, with Tamarkan than it is for Epidemius, because again, the top skill line is just pointless. If there's any good thing from this campaign is that the top bar system, they took that, refined that, and added it to Scrag, and it works for Scrag very, very well, but not for Epidemius. Yeah, there is a balance that Nurgle does need in Warhammer 3 in general, but Epidemius suffers from it the most. And number 3 is Grand Hierophant Khatep of the Tomb Kings. Now, Khatep is actually a much better Legendary Lord than a lot of people give him credit for. He has a relatively safe starting position over here. He doesn't have any natural enemies among the Legendary Lords in this area, because the Stanka is going to fight Morathi, Sisters of Twilight. Well, you might end up fighting them, but you can just as easily avoid fighting them. You might argue about Grombrindle, but he's busy with Malekith. Malekith is busy with Grombrindle, and then Valkia potentially. I mean, seriously, the only threat over here might be Tarok, and he's not really much of a threat. So you have a safe starting position, you do have Lich Priest benefits, you have a pretty solid starting province, a starting army, Casket of Souls as a mount. So Khatep is not a horrible Legendary Lord, but his campaign is completely pointless. Because, well, what is the objective of this campaign? Oh, awaken the legions of the Mortuary Cult. And that's a lovely, lovely affair, a waste of complete time, because these units are, well, pretty much useless in general, and they do cost quite a bit of resources in order to get them. But here's the problem that I have with Khatep's campaign. First off, the entire system of the Books of Nagash is just a really bad system, because you're going to end up having to fight factions that you would never fight otherwise. But then you also want, in order to achieve your campaign victory conditions, you need, in fact, to go all the way to Khemri. So what is the value proposition in making a Tomb Kings campaign that is very far away from all the other Tomb Kings and then force that legendary lord to go all the way back to Khemri anyway? Sure, you can do it, more likely through Cathay than going through the sea over here, but even then it is a significant waste of time, a significant, just a very boring campaign. Really, overall, because it's really an enter and button simulator with Tomb Kings. That can be a case. But one of the things you can say about like Cetra and Khalida, at least their campaigns can be somewhat interesting because they have a lot of shit on their plate. That doesn't mean that Tomb Kings are very well designed. But when you add the inherent issues of Tomb Kings where they're just like hurrying up and waiting for dynasties to be unlocked so they can increase their army capacity, and then you make a campaign where the early game is nothing, there's no real challenge throughout the course of the campaign, and you also have an objective that requires you to go a very far distance away, it ends up not really working all that well. So this ends up being easily the worst campaign for the Tomb Kings and the most pointless campaign as well. Also, it is breaking the lore, literally, because like it essentially tells you you have to go fight Cetra, who Khatep is extremely loyal to in the lore. I mean, Khatep is the one that brought Cetra back in the lore, and for a good reason. And then he warns Cetra in the end times, even though he knows Cetra is going to execute him for it, and he accepts that. That is the kind of person, if you will, that Khatep is in the lore. It's like, here it's like, oh yeah, just go conquer Khemri. That is so absurd as a victory condition. So if there is ever a Tomb King rework, they really should focus on improving Khatep's campaign situation. Well, to be fair, they should improve all campaign situations for the Tomb Kings, but I do genuinely believe that Khatep's campaign is the worst of the bunch by far. He's not even the Teclis of the Tomb Kings, because at least Teclis has something to do in his campaign. It's an awful campaign all the same, but you don't even have the quote-unquote joy of dealing with someone like Kara's Fate Weaver, which I suppose is a benefit to some extent, but still, at least it gives you something to do, whereas over here it's a nothing campaign overall. At number 2, we have Lord Mazdamundi of the Lizardmen. Now, I understand that from Creative Assembly's perspective, Mazdamundi was supposed to represent the generic legendary lord of the Lizardmen. But consider someone like Tyrion, someone like Thorgrim. Those are great generic legendary lords, because while they don't necessarily specialize in one thing or another and can use all kinds of units, so to be sure, Tyrion is more about archers and spearmen, but still, they can use all kinds of units and have different playstyles work for them. Mazdamundi doesn't even have that going for him. Faction effect-wise, he gets a -10 diplomatic relations with many factions. He has a -50% construction cost for Star Chamber buildings, which are a building you rarely build during the course of a campaign. So you get a discount on this one. You might build 1 or 2 of these. I mean, very late on you might build a lot of these, to be sure. But having a discount when so many buildings of the Lizardmen are so much more expensive is not really great. If it was a 50% construction cost on, say, provincial capitals, that would be a phenomenal benefit, but it's not. Then he gets a -30% right cost. Okay, again, same situation. You don't use rights that many times. Sure, it's nice to have that cost benefit when you are using them, but the cooldowns of these rights are so long, 50 turns, 25 turns, 20 turns, that you're usually not going to use them that much to begin with. Then on top of that, when you're looking at his starting position, it is an annoying start, a difficult start even, because you have a Slaaneshi faction over here, you have Skeggi, who's actually quite a difficult thing to take, especially once they start pumping on Marauder champions, and Berserkers as well, and they'll do that very quickly. So that is annoying. But beyond that, you've got a pretty good relationship with Morathi. You don't have to fight Jan Bo. So what is the value proposition in this campaign? what are you really going to gain from playing this campaign? It's not an interesting starting position, even though it is a central position in Lustria. Well, Lustria pretty much sucks. But just having a central position when you're surrounded by factions that are, at worst, apathetic towards you, at best, some of your best pals throughout an entire campaign, unless you choose to conquer them, like I'm preparing over here to conquer Yanbo. But even then, just ends up feeling like a pointless campaign. Further, Mazdamundi is supposed to be an extraordinary caster in the lore, but let's look at his casting ability. He gets targeting range and wins a magic power reserve capacity plus 15. Sure, but you know what he's lacking? Some actually good spells. Okay, he has banishment, he has ruination of cities, but that's about it. Like, they gave a Comet of Cassandora, which, it's not a horrible spell, but it's certainly not a superb spell either. He can be pretty decent in combat, but as far as casting goes, you have Lord Croak, who can be unlocked pretty quickly in any Lizardman campaign, and Lord Croak is a substantially better caster to have. Mazdamundi is so bad that in every genuine sense, a Saurus Oldblood, with an upkeep benefit for Saurus Infantry, with Lord Croak, is going to have a much, much better army. I mean, it is in general an issue with Slan Lords that they're not worth it, for the most part, in a Lizardman campaign, and they should be. But Mazdamundi is worse as a Legendary Lord like, I would dare say, like, he's not even really that much better than a generic Slan Lord. A generic Slan Lord is not really great to begin with. But it's worse for Mazdamundi because as a Legendary Lord, he should be much better, and yet is not. It's not that it's just a bad campaign, it just feels like a completely pointless campaign that does not do any favors to the character involved. My personal headcanon on this is Mazdamundi's not really all there. He's just, you know, sleeping on the job and playing the campaign with him sleeping. That's really what's going on over here. Once he wakes up, it will be a very, very different affair. Hopefully, if we ever get an update to the Lizardman. And finally, at number 1, it is Daniel, the Demon Prince, Yuri. The Daniel nickname, by the way, comes from a marketing video that Creative Assembly did on the subject of the Demon Prince. Regardless, the Demon Prince is genuinely one of the most worthless factions that Creative Assembly has ever designed. It's also the worst faction that they've ever designed in the history of Total War. And it's quite a shame too, like it's quite devastating to some extent, because you play the prologue campaign, it's a pretty solid story, it is interesting, and then you play the actual campaign in the game, and it ends up being a freaking joke of a campaign. I don't understand what's the value proposition in making a campaign in Total War where you have this focus on establishing a story of a character, making that character interesting, and then just making him a fully customizable character that doesn't have a research tree, unlike everyone else. Like, yeah, the whole demonic glory system does not replace a research tree. Or, well, it kind of is trying to, but it falls far short. You can't even equip proper items. You have these customizable body parts that are not as good as proper items. It's quite sad about Daniel because a generic demon prince is actually a better lord than he is. Better at leading armies, better in combat. Sure, there's a couple of things, like for instance, the Glorious Warfare skill tree does offer you some nice solid benefits, to be sure, but all the same, you do end up with a very, very limited campaign in many ways, and a campaign that has almost no reason to exist. It's not even a hard campaign, it's just there. It's just like a meaningless, pointless piece of crap of a campaign that should not really exist in Total War. It's not the most interesting starting position. I mean, yeah, Epidemius has that same problem, but it's not an interesting starting position. You may only have one enemy that can prove any kind of challenge, and that's, of course, Boris Ursus, if you even have to fight him. And then what is there left to do in this campaign? Very limited economy, limited hero recruitment, limited army situation. Warriors of Chaos are just much better to play. If you want to play a demonic focus faction where you have all of the types of demons, Be'lakor exists, and he's actually much, much better as a campaign in general. Now, maybe this will change going forward, because I keep thinking about that leak that was posted on Reddit. And just on that subject, to note, I think it's been something that people were talking about in the Chinese community, and then someone finally got around to translating it in English, probably for Google Translate, if I were to hazard a guess on that subject. But regardless, Glotkin was mentioned as Chaos, so I think it would be weird to have Glotkin as Chaos, though maybe Glotkin should have been in the game as opposed to Epidemius. Maybe that would have been a lot more interesting. But if they were doing Glotkin and they're making Glotkin like, a Chaos faction, then that would be the opportunity to rework the Demon Prince and maybe make Be'lakor a demonic faction as opposed to Warriors of Chaos faction, because it kind of doesn't make sense if you ask me why Be'lakor is Warriors of Chaos faction when his whole thing is with demons. I understand why CA did it, right? They reworked Warriors of Chaos. They weren't willing to rework the Daniel's mechanic, so that's why they did Be'lakor as Warriors of Chaos, but from a lore perspective, it doesn't necessarily make sense. Regardless, that's all I had to say. Questine signing out. Stay tuned for more.